So we are talking about the account of the flood, and we have come to Genesis chapter 8 this evening. Genesis chapter 8, and we're going to read Genesis 8 in its entirety. It's on page 7, your pew Bibles, if you would like to follow along. Otherwise, the words are going to be on the screen. Genesis chapter 8, beginning at verse 1. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him anymore. In the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, "Go out from the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, "I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, tonight as we dive into Genesis chapter 8, we should understand that this marks a turning point not just in Noah's story, but in the story of creation itself. The floodwaters recede, the ark finds rest, and a new world begins to emerge. It's exciting. And this passage is loaded with meaning. And I want to look at 4 distinct scenes with you tonight. First, the end of the flood. Second, Noah's search for dry land. Third, the renewed creation mandate. And fourth, Noah's worshipful response. Each of these scenes is going to speak to us today about, well, first and foremost, God's faithfulness, but also about the importance of living with patient hope, a theme that dovetails very nice with our Matthew 24 series in the morning. But it speaks to us also about the beauty of restoration and also about the power of worship. And so the first point I want to make is that God never forgets his people. In the opening verses of chapter 8, the flood subsides. The relentless rain finally stops, and the flood waters begin to recede. But the real headline here is not weather-related or meteorological, it's theological. We read the powerful phrase, "But God remembered Noah." Now, I want you to understand that's not just a casual case of recollection, as though God suddenly remembered where he left his keys. No, this is covenantal language. It's an expression of grace. God's remembrance of Noah is his faithfulness in action. Think about the contrast. The old world, the world of Adam, is gone. Civilization outside of Noah's family and the animals that were on the ark has been judged and destroyed. But Noah is alive, safe in the ark, and remembered by God. And that remembrance is the hinge on which the whole rest of the chapter turns. It's not just about Noah surviving the flood, it's about God keeping his promises. Commentator Gerhard Alders puts it well, that God remembered Noah means that God took care of them throughout the great flood, and thus he fulfilled his covenant promise of Genesis chapter 6. Let me give you that reminder. Genesis 6, verse 18. "But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you." God told Noah in chapter 6 that he would make a covenant with him. And now we see that promise fulfilled. But it's wonderful to focus on God and what God initiates here. And that's truly the most important thing. But I don't want to miss the human side of this either. I want you to think about this. Try and put yourself in Noah's sandals here. For 150 days, Noah had been floating in what must have felt like a giant coffin. No sign of dry land. No hint that the flood was letting up. He may have wondered, and may have wondered multiple times, "Lord, have you forgotten me?" And yet, in retrospect, we see that God had been faithful all along. Even when Noah could not see it, God was working. Verse 1 also tells us that God used natural causes to bring about the drying of the earth. And this is something that I found interesting. He sent a wind, just like he did in Exodus 14 when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. That wind is a divine agent, part of God's toolkit for salvation. Yes, he can intervene miraculously, but more often than not, God uses his sovereignty and his sustaining over creation to accomplish his purposes. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven are closed. The rain stops and the waters begin to recede. Eventually, the ark comes to rest in the mountains of Ararat, probably in modern-day Armenia. Now, here's a key lesson. When God brings judgment, notice that his people, Noah and his family, are not spared from the experience, but they are preserved through it. That's an important point that we learn in this story. Noah was not removed from the flood, he was carried through it. And that too is how God often works. Judgment begins at the house of God, as the prophets say, and we are purified by the same trials that punish the wicked. But we are never forgotten. Matthew Henry says it well, "Those that remember God shall certainly be remembered by him, no matter how desolate their condition." Second point, the Lord tests our patience and hope. As we move to the second scene, we encounter Noah searching for dry land. After the waters begin to recede, Noah starts looking for signs that it's time to leave the ark. And who can blame him? He's been cooped up with his family and a bunch of animals for like a year. The smells, the noise, the cramped quarters. It's not hard to imagine Noah longing for fresh air and open space. So he opens a window. But from his mountain perch, he can't see the plains below. He needs some help. And so he makes use of some of the birds that he has at his disposal. He sends out a raven, a bird that feeds on carrion and can survive in harsh conditions. It flies here and there, but does not bring back any useful information. Then he sends out a dove. Initially, she returns, having found no place to land. So 7 days later, he sends her again, and this time, she brings back a freshly plucked olive leaf. And that is the sign that Noah had been waiting for. New life is out there. The flood has truly ended. 7 days after that, he sends out the dove, and the dove doesn't return at all. She's found a home. And I think this scene is loaded with symbolism. The olive leaf in particular is traditionally a harbinger of peace, a sign that the war God waged against creation is over, and it's also a sign of new creation. Just as Adam and Eve stepped into a pristine world, Noah and his family are about to step into a renewed one. And with this confirmation, Noah removes the covering from the ark, which was likely a skin or a sheet that made the deck watertight. And finally, after more than a year, the ground is dry enough to disembark. So what's the takeaway here? Well, I would argue that it is that God calls his people to wait with patience and hope. And I want you to notice the pattern here. God commands, and Noah obeys. Noah does not move until God gives the word. Even when he's anxious, even when he's desperate to leave the ark, he waits. And I would consider that faith. I would consider that trust. And brothers and sisters, that is our call as well. Even in the midst of trials, even in the midst of suffering, when it comes, to wait patiently and hopefully for God's timing. Third point, the Lord renews his creation mandate. Now we come to the third scene, the renewed creation mandate. God tells Noah and his family and all of the animals to leave the ark. And again, Noah obeys immediately. Again, we see his character, faithful, obedient, responsive to God's word. But look closely at the language that God uses in verse 17. He says, "Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." Does that sound familiar to you? In a way, this is Genesis 1 all over again. The language of the original creation is reintroduced, and it's almost as if God has set the reset button. The world has been cleansed by judgment, and now a new creation begins. Noah is a second Adam stepping into a virgin world. Commentator Derek Kidner captures this beautifully. As almost a second Adam, Noah steps into a virgin world washed clean by judgment, and the spectacular deliverance in the ark is seen as a mere preliminary to salvation proper, which is the new creation. The scene reminds us that the work of God's redemption is about restoring all of the original blessings of creation. God doesn't abandon his design, he renews it. The mandate to be fruitful and multiply is reissued. The animals go out by their families just as they came in, and Noah is entrusted with the task of stewarding this new world. It's a powerful picture of restoration. God's redeeming work does not give us something that's second best. It restores and even betters the conditions of his original creation. And that, when you think about it, is the hope that we live with. That is part and parcel to the promise of redemption. Fourth point, the Lord's saving work evokes worship. Finally, we see Noah's worshipful response. The first thing Noah does after leaving the ark is to build an altar and offer sacrifices. His first thought is Godward. His first act is worship. Incidentally, this is the first time that the word altar occurs in the Bible. We've seen sacrifices before. Think about Cain and Abel. But there has been no mention of an altar. And incidentally, the word used for sacrifice here is the same one that's used for burnt offerings in the time of Moses, which I think is significant. It suggests that Noah's sacrifice was not just thanksgiving, it was intercession. Why is that important? Because it is a recognition that God's judgment of the world had been just, and that sin requires atonement. And God responds in verse 21. When the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. Now that is a striking statement. It echoes Genesis 6, where God judged the world because the human heart was evil all the time. All of its inclinations were evil. And now he promises not to judge again by flood, even though the human heart has not really fundamentally changed. Now, I should mention that this passage has puzzled commentators somewhat. Is God saying he will not judge for the very reason that he did judge? Well, not quite. The key is grace. God acknowledges here that human depravity is a permanent reality in a fallen world. But in his grace, by his initiative, he chooses not to judge again by water. And that grace is linked to the sacrifice of Noah. Noah's offering is a foretaste of something greater. It points forward to the ultimate sacrifice, the propitiation, the atonement of Jesus Christ. Just as Noah's sacrifice stayed God's hand, so to speak, the sacrifice of Jesus secures our salvation. And so the prayers of the prophet Daniel, or the prayers of the saints in Revelation, or Noah's worship here way back in Genesis chapter 8, all of that points to the power of intercession and the promise of redemption. And verse 22 indeed closes with a sweeping promise. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, shall not cease. It is the reestablishment of order, of rhythm, of stability. Until the final judgment, God will sustain his creation. This is grace. This is covenant. This is hope. So let me share some final thoughts. Genesis 8 is more than a historical account. It's a theological treatise showing us that God always remembers his people, even in judgment. And so what are we to take away from Genesis 8? We've worked through 4 different scenes. each loaded with meaning, each echoing truths that resonate far beyond Noah's time. And now, as we step back and look at the whole picture, what we see is a God who remembers, a God who restores, a God who renews, and a God who receives worship. See, this account is not just about the end of a flood. This account is about the beginning of a brand new world. It's about the faithfulness of God in the midst of judgment. It's about the patience of a servant waiting for release. It's about the reissuing of a divine commission. And it is about the heartfelt worship that flows from receiving the gift of salvation. And here's a deeper truth, no surprise here. But Noah's story is our story as well, because we too live in a world that knows judgment. We too wait for signs of renewal. We too are called to inhabit creation with purpose and with obedience. And we too are invited to respond to God's grace with worship. Genesis 8 reminds us that God's covenant faithfulness is not a relic of the past. It is the foundation of our present and the sure promise of our future. The God who remembered Noah remembers us as well. The God who sent the winds to dry the waters sends his Spirit to renew our hearts. The God who received Noah's sacrifice receives our worship, not because it's perfect, but because it is offered through the perfect sacrifice of Christ. And so as we close this evening, let us remember that we too are people who are preserved through judgment. Let us remember that we are called to wait in hope, commissioned to live faithfully, invited to worship deeply. And let us trust that the God who remembered Noah will never forget us. May we live in the wake of grace, anchored in the covenant, and confident in the promise that while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, shall not cease. Amen. Let's pray.